that you might not have seen before in the Blue Hills, but their existence and survival make a big difference to the forests in the Blue Hills. I'm Judy Lara Jacobs, the Executive Director of the Friends of the Blue Hills.
And I'm Sam Jaffe. I am the director of the Caterpillar Lab.
And what we would like to know from you is if you have seen caterpillars this season in the fall. There are lots of caterpillars out, but not many of us look under the leaves to find them. So a yes or no in the comments would be great. And if you have any comments throughout the live or the replay, please just leave them in the comments and Sam will get back to you. This is the fourth and final Blue Hills Alive. It's a trial Facebook Live program that we would love to know what you think of, and we'll get back to that a little bit later. But can we start out, Sam, by, why don't you just start by talking about how you became so passionate about caterpillars?
Caterpillars, sure. Well, I've been raising caterpillars, like this Polyphemus moth caterpillar, since I was about 3 years old or so. My parents tell me that I would just bring them into the house and they'd find them crawling across the kitchen floor and eventually link them back to me. So they helped me raise them. I got to know them very intimately, their life cycles, their defenses, and have been sort of a champion of them all my life. But more recently, just learning how I was able to get other people excited about these sort of unsung heroes of our ecology and Blue Hill ecology. It just was addictive and wanted to tell more people about them.
That's great. And how are they important to the rest of the ecosystem, to the other wildlife and plants?
Sure. Well, Lepidoptera, the butterflies and moths, are really diverse here in New England. We have about an estimated 5,000 species, mostly moths. But they all start out as caterpillars, and they're all in the forests, eating different plants, interacting with lots of different things. So a lot of them are specialists on just a few plants, and they've been evolving with those trees and shrubs and herbs for a very long time. And many of them have parasitoid wasps and flies and predator birds that specialize on just those few caterpillars. So they really connect plants to the birds, to the parasites, and are a glue that holds different parts of our ecosystem together. Without caterpillars, I think we'd find that all of this beauty just suffers dramatically, that diversity decreases, and we lose a lot more than just caterpillars.
And what are some of the threats to caterpillars and butterflies?
Quite a lot, especially close to cities like here in Boston. We have pesticides which can wipe out large numbers of caterpillars. Things like mosquito spraying is thought to decrease the diversity towards urban areas. Lights actually can be a problem. Now I put lights out every night to attract moths, and that's one way we get caterpillars, by getting eggs from moths. But when they're going to just street lights, grocery store lights, they sit there all night and they get eaten by birds in the morning. So that can decrease the population. And then things like this Polyphemus moth have been struggling because of an introduced parasitoid fly as well. It was introduced to kill off gypsy moths, went after all of our native caterpillars. So just a note that we think caterpillars are everywhere and abundant, and they are in many ways, but for the number of gypsy moths that we see, there are whole slews of native caterpillars that really aren't doing that well, that need our help and consideration.
And can you talk about the Caterpillar Lab?
Sure.
What do you do?
Well, the Caterpillar Lab started off through photography, actually. When I lived in the Blue Hills a number of years ago, I started taking pictures, actually this time of year, one fall, of all of the caterpillars I was seeing. So it was October, and I was finding Polyphemus caterpillars on bright red maple leaves. I was finding spicebush swallowtail caterpillars and other really charismatic species, and I took their pictures and eventually showed those at galleries around New England. People were really excited to learn that these creatures lived nearby, and I could stand near a photograph and just talk to people for hours about the value of native ecosystems, the things they could find in their backyards, details of evolutionary biology, parasitism, anatomy, and just the love of caterpillars. So this whole range of things, from photographs to details of biology. And from that, I just started putting on live caterpillar shows, and ended up finding myself running a nonprofit devoted to these creatures, telling their stories, and sharing that with tens of thousands of people every summer through outreach. So we still do photography and film at the Caterpillar Lab, but we do school programs, museum programs. The home base is now away from the Blue Hills up in Keene, New Hampshire, but doesn't mean I don't come down here every year to see some old friends.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. So do you want to show us some of the critters that you brought and give us
Sure.
a little idea of who they are?
Well, let's start with just this guy here. So the Polyphemus caterpillar is one of our giant silk moths, and many of the giant silk moths have become rare around cities, but the Blue Hills has enough habitat that we still find this species, Polyphemus, Luna, Cecropia. These are these big, magnificent insects that people find it hard to believe are native New England creatures. What really was powerful when I moved to the Blue Hills area was to realize that for insects anyways, this was wild territory. You could find anything here, even though it was so close to Boston. And that became part of the narrative of the Caterpillar Lab, that insects, magnificent insects, these caterpillars, could be found close to home wherever you are. So I'll put the Polyphemus down and take up another one.
Here's a, I love
You get to choose which caterpillar.
Exactly.
This is really a Blue Hills special here. This is the spicebush swallowtail caterpillar. It's actually a snake mimic. So these eyes here are just false eye spots on the back of the thorax. The real head, I don't know how the focus is doing here, but the real head's right here, and it's spinning silk currently in an effort to make a little shelter in this leaf. These are on spicebush and sassafras plants throughout the Blue Hills. Right on top of Great Blue is a neat place to look for them. And you don't actually look for the caterpillar, you look for a folded leaf that they're inside of. These are host plant specialists, so you need to learn your plants and you can find these caterpillars. And this is probably the best species there is for a caterpillar walk when you want to impress a crowd, to just walk up to a tree and find a snake mimic like this spicebush swallowtail. Thanks. These guys are fun, huh? These are big poop mimic caterpillars. So this is the giant swallowtail caterpillar, very closely related to the spicebush swallowtail, but with a different defensive strategy. These ones look like a cross between a snake and a bird dropping. We should be able to see these inflatable horns that the swallowtails have, so watch this one closely. Oh, it's not into it today. Let's try the other one here. Okay, so this guy, you give him a little poke, and they inflate red tentacles out of their forehead called osmeterium. I think these have been at too many shows, and we've asked them to do that too often. This is a species that did not used to occur very often in New England, but with climate change, with warming weather, they're surviving more and more here. And we expect to find them in the wild and in gardens very soon. In the Blue Hills, there's a few native host plants, but the best way to see a giant swallowtail is to plant things like common rue and gas plant in your yards. Just put these guys down.
Oh my God, this is living.
Oh yeah, you weren't expecting that. Here, I'll take all these guys. I brought these because at our outreach programs, these are some of the most surprising things we can share with people. Every caterpillar has to grow up one day and become something else. And we'll ask people and they'll say, well, they become butterflies and moths, but they don't do that right away. They have to transform first into a living, wiggling pupa stage. And no one expects these guys to be wiggling around like this. The pupa is very misunderstood. They're often considered like a pod that's supposed to have a caterpillar inside melting down and reforming. It's not it at all. They actually are the animal. The caterpillar sheds away its skin and becomes this. So this animal's wiggling its rear end here, and it's got a face here, a tongue chamber for this species. And these are all over the Blue Hills, but you're not going to see many of them because caterpillars do a lot to hide their pupa stage. Some go underground to pupate, some build cocoons and pupate inside. One of the most common pupa you will see, because it's out in the open on tree trunks, is the gypsy moth pupa, but there's many more hiding behind the scenes. Can I show just that big bucket full of black swallowtail,
Sure,
since it
sure,
came
one
from the
more.
Blue Hills? Sure.
Oh, right. I forgot.
So before this, I stopped at the Blue
Brookwood
Hills
Farm.
Brookwood Farm, and you were there, surprisingly. And I just went for a walk in the fennel patch, and here are all of the black swallowtail caterpillars that were still feeding late in the year. I get a lot of phone calls about these in October and even November because people are worried they're going to freeze solid during the night and want to know if they need to take their caterpillars inside, but they do just fine. And this is another species with those inflatable horns and just a delightful backyard and blue hill caterpillar.
Great. Well, thank you, Sam, for sharing your passion and showing us maybe some new creatures that we haven't seen before. Thank you, and thank you for watching. This is the last of our trial runs of Blue Hills Alive, which was a Facebook Live show for the last 4 weeks. And the purpose was to bring you insights into the Blue Hills that you might not get other places. And we would love to know from you your feedback. If you could write in the comments the kinds of things you might like to see, or the kinds of things that you liked seeing, or any of your ideas. What we thought you would be interested in would be recreation and sports, which is why we brought in someone to talk about training for an ultra marathon, plants, wildlife, geology, history, and we didn't get to it in the last 4 weeks, but we thought you might also be interested in hearing about the threats to the Blue Hills and what you could do for it. So if you could write in the comments what you would find valuable in this sort of Facebook Live show or in another medium, that would really be helpful for us to evaluate whether we should continue to do this sort of thing. So thank you. And lastly, if you like sunsets and fall foliage and the Blue Hills, you will want to join us this Saturday at 4:30 or later for the Sunset Hike, which is a self-guided hike up to Great Blue. You'll sip on hot cider and watch the sunset, and then afterwards, thanks to the Blue Hill ski area, we'll turn on the lights and you can go down the hill under the lights. So bring your friends and family and maybe a picnic. You probably want to bring a flashlight as well. And we do ask, it's a free event, but we ask that you check in and out at the Blue Hill ski area just for safety reasons. If you want more information, you can leave a comment, we'll answer it, or go to friendsofthebluehills.org/sunset. And the sunset is on Saturday is around 6 o'clock, so you'll want to be at the top at least by 6 o'clock. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you Saturday, and enjoy the Blue Hills.